find that story, while horrifying, it sort of humanizes them a little bit. That's me looking on the bright side. Good evening. I'm going to read a couple of little passages having to do with the charter of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, so please don't leave. At the Massachusetts State Archives in Boston, Assistant Archivist Michael Comeau shows me the most important item John Winthrop packed in his luggage on the Arbella. That's the ship he came to New England on. The charter of the Massachusetts Bay Company granted by King Charles I. The charter authorized the Massachusetts Bay Company to colonize all the land between 3 miles north of the Merrimack River and 3 miles south of the Charles River, stretching from sea to sea, i.e. all the way to the Pacific. We are in Massachusetts right now, apparently. Just so long as the company's executives make no laws contrary or repugnant to the laws and statutes of England. One innovation in the charter that does afford Americans front row seats at the birth of the national pastime, regularly scheduled voting. The charter states that the Massachusetts governor, deputy governor, and the representatives known as assistants are to be voted in or out every spring. Historian Samuel Eliot Morrison opined, the particular feature of this charter, which proved so successful and enduring as to become an American institution, was the principle of stated elections. This is, he continues, in contrast to the English or parliamentary system. And this is still true. As an American, I am entirely flummoxed by the willy-nilly process by which the Brits acquire a new prime minister. It seems like one afternoon after tea, they decide to get rid of the old one, and then the majority party in the House of Commons picks the person they most want to yell at on C-SPAN's prime minister's questions. Then the new prime minister goes to Buckingham Palace, and for 2 minutes, the whole country politely pretends he was the Queen's idea. U.S. citizens can thank the Massachusetts Bay colonists for breaking with that tradition, while Americans choose a new president in a process that is as insane as the way the United Kingdom ends up with a new prime minister, given the fact that the Electoral College makes sure our president is chosen by 3 counties in Florida and Ohio, or 9 Supreme Court justices. At least we can print Election Day in our calendars ahead of time. And looking forward to that date circled in November can get a citizen through a lot of cold nights. As Morrison noted, the Massachusetts Bay's corporate mode of election put an almost continuous check on both executive officers and representatives. It became an essential principle of every state constitution and the federal constitution. The Massachusetts Bay Colony becomes, under this charter, a sort of republic, the most severely limited, totalitarian, closed-minded, vindictive, hard-ass republic possible. But the democratic impulse is a mutating virus that adapts and changes, quickens and grows. It is contagious, and the charter is one important sneeze. At first, the General Court in 1630 consisted of 8 people, the governor, the deputy governor, and 6 other magistrates called assistants. But within a year, 100 others, church members all, known as freemen, are sworn into court. They are granted the power to elect the assistants, who in turn elect the governor. But by 1632, the freemen raise a stink and are allowed to elect the governor directly. They are, however, required to take an oath that they will be obedient to the governor and assistants. They also pledge to rat out their neighbors by alerting the governor and assistants, quote, of any sedition, violence, treachery, or other hurt or evil which I shall know, hear, or vehemently suspect to be plotted or intended against the said commonwealth or the said government established. Now, the vow of obedience and that thing about vehement suspicions doesn't exactly make the democratic idealist in me want to hum the trombone part from Stars and Stripes Forever. Still, gotta start somewhere. So it's worth celebrating a little that within 2 years of the Massachusetts Bay Company's arrival on these shores, 100 white male religious fanatics get to pick their own dictator in a show of hands. Winthrop will be that dictator on and off until he dies. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to a couple of years to our next adventure with the charter. In July of 1634, the assistants receive a letter from Matthew Craddock, the Massachusetts Bay Company's man in England. The Commission for Regulating Plantations, headed by the king's pet, Bishop Laud, is recalling the patent, i.e. the charter. Bishop Laud is in line to become the Archbishop of Canterbury and the head of the Church of England, and he hates the Puritans with an unchristian-like zeal, and it's fairly mutual. So Bishop Laud, under the, with the backing of the king and all the king of England's power, is asking for the colonists to send back the charter. Craddock wrote to us to send it home, records Winthrop. Ship back the charter, and they might as well pack up the whole colony in the same trunk. The assistants agreed to reply to Craddock's letter, but without the charter and without any excuse or answer. Poor Craddock, ordered by Laud to procure a document, and all he gets in return is a letter about how the weather sure is hot in Boston. Winthrop records that Craddock fires back, enclosing in his reply, hint, hint, a copy of the government order whereby we were required to send over our patent. Unnerved, the assistants nevertheless write Craddock back that they couldn't possibly legally return the charter to England, but by a general court which would not be held until the following September. In Winthrop's next entry, now, remember what they're doing. They're basically disobeying the King of England, which is not, people don't usually do that quite yet. We're in the 1630s here. In Winthrop's next entry, the assistants meet on Castle Island in Boston Harbor, where they conspire to build a fort. So think about what's just happened. They're asked to send the charter, and they decide they're not gonna, and then in the very next entry, they're, building fortifications. Remember the apocalyptic paranoia? You don't, because you haven't read this part yet, but let's say you remember the apocalyptic paranoia that inspired the passengers on the Winthrop fleet to quit England in the first place. Well, that was mostly superstitious conjecture based on pessimistic readings of biblical prophets and worries that the 30 Years' War might spread to England. This business of the King's Committee recalling the charter is an actual concrete threat to their hard-won way of life. Winthrop was born the year his country's fleet defeated the mighty Spanish Armada. He knows English monarchs are not shy about dispatching their battleships when provoked. In August, Winthrop gets word that the colony's enemies in England, led by men banished from Massachusetts, have made railing speeches and threats against this plantation and Mr. Winthrop in particular. Winthrop always refers to himself in the third person. They succeeded in getting Laud's committee to appoint a governor to come to Massachusetts with a military escort and take over. By January, Winthrop says, the assistants and ministers hold a meeting in Boston to discuss what we ought to do if a general governor should be sent out of England. In his journal, Winthrop records their answer to that cataclysmic question of how the men of Massachusetts should respond to the arrival of a royal interloper sent to put an end to their city on a hill. He wrote that they decided, we ought not to accept him. That's all he says. Remember, this is almost a century and a half before the Boston Tea Party, before Lexington and Concord. John Winthrop is no son of liberty. He's a Puritan father of communal control. But behind the politeness of that line, we ought not to accept him, Winthrop reveals himself. We know from his journal that he left England with a recipe for gunpowder. And that same journal is clear about this. If the king's men come from Massachusetts, Massachusetts will be ready. So where do these men get such cheek? They are the king's subjects, not citizens. What are the sources of their defiance? There are, I think, primarily two, the Bible and the Magna Carta. The Bible is full of anecdotes that prime the pump of treason. We've already read, well, you haven't, but probably, of King James' irritation with the way the Geneva Bible, that's the Calvinist Bible that has a bunch of really smart aleck margin notes about, how kings and pharaohs are always wrong. So King James actually, sponsors this new version, the King James version, he would like better. Let's see. So King James' irritation with the way the Geneva Bible's margin notes spell out how it is biblically sanctioned to defy the Egyptian Pharaoh and therefore all monarchs when he commands that Hebrew babies be murdered. But those prickly Protestant margin notes are simply amplifying what's already in the text. I grew up on the King James Version of the Bible, the translation that was, by definition, supposed to be more tolerable to kings. And I would like to point out that by the time I was 8, I had already put on a puppet show about how people of faith are required to stand up to wrong-headed kings. Every summer when I was a kid, I attended vacation Bible school. It was like arts and crafts camp, only churchier. Firing and glazing, ceramic praying hands, bookends, that sort of thing. And we studied the book of Daniel's 3rd chapter, in which Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, commissioned a gold idol that his subjects were required to bow down to. Anyone failing to kneel before the image shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Kneeling before a false idol being an obvious violation of the second commandment, 3 Jews on Nebuchadnezzar's payroll refused to worship another god. And the 3 lawbreakers, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are hauled before the king, who tells them that when he said that thing about the fiery furnace, he really meant it. And they reply that perhaps God will save them from the flames, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Those words are insolent and bold, even when spoken by a felt puppet with glued-on googly eyes. The 3 hope God will save them, but if not, they will gladly burn. Nebuchadnezzar is happy to help them find out. He has Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the furnace. And to mimic the flames, my fellow Bible students and I rattled flashlights at the puppets, who remained perfectly still and perfectly unharmed, not a yarn hair on their head singed. They have no hurt, marveled the king, who decreed that anyone from anywhere who spoke against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. A happy ending. The faithful defy the king, and the king admits he was wrong. The lessons of that story: be true to yourself, be not afraid to defy authority, be willing to die for what you believe in, had a profound influence on my own moral backbone, and I am not alone. In his letter from the Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King Jr. writes of the law-breaking that landed him in the clink. Of course, there's nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evident sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. As for the second source of the New Englanders' impertinence, the Magna Carta, it came about for the same reason so many landmarks of liberty, including the Declaration of Independence, were established in the English-speaking world, because the upper middle class balked at paying taxes. In 1215, armed English barons, sick of being bilked to pay for King John's wars in France, captured London. Seeking a truce, the king met the barons at Runnymede, a meadow by the River Thames, and they hammered out an agreement in Latin that came to be called Magna Carta, the Great Charter. Many of the Magna Carta's 63 clauses enumerate antiquated rules about knights, forests, wine measurement, removing fish wares from the Thames, owing money to Jews, and, in case anyone is worried, restoring the son of Llewellyn and all the hostages from Wales. But two concepts in it stuck. Clause 39 states, "No free man shall be taken or imprisoned or outlawed or exiled or in any way ruined except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land." In other words, the king can't just jail his subjects on a whim. And Clause 40 declares, "To no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay right or justice." In other words, a prisoner cannot be locked up indefinitely without a sentence. Thus, the basic gist of the Magna Carta is that no one, including the king, is above the law of the land. In 1628, 2 years before the Winthrop fleet sailed from Massachusetts, the Magna Carta was enjoying something of a comeback thanks to the Five Knights case and the Petition of Right. In 1627, King Charles I jailed 5 members of Parliament who refused to pay a forced loan to underwrite his war in Spain. Charles, who had held a grudge against Spain ever since the court at Madrid turned down his proposal of marriage to the Spanish princess, had dispatched his armies under the command of his incompetent best friend, the Duke of Buckingham, to go to war with Spain. Things were not going well. Buckingham's expedition to attack Cadiz in 1625, for example, was pure slapstick. English troops stumbled onto warehouses stocked with Spanish wine and got too drunk to fight. So when 5 English knights, members of the landed gentry, refused the king's demand of a loan, which would probably never be repaid, to fund such foreign policy buffoonery, Charles had them thrown in jail for who knows how long. Parliament rallied to the knights' cause, arguing that the Magna Carta denied the king the right to jail his subjects on a whim and forever. Edward Coke, the most important English legal mind of the 17th century, led the charge against the king, famously proclaiming to Parliament, "Take heed what we yield unto. Magna Carta is such a fellow that he will have no sovereign." Coke helped author Parliament's landmark response in 1628, the Petition of Right. It states, "It is declared and enacted that no free man may be taken or imprisoned or disseised of his freehold or liberties or his free customs or be outlawed or exiled or in any manner destroyed, but by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land." Coke and Parliament goaded Charles I into signing off on the Petition of Right. Of course, Charles pretty much ignored it and canceled Parliament the following year, prompting some of the jitters that made so many Englishmen, including Winthrop, flee to New England. Nevertheless, the petition was on the books. Its reframing of the Magna Carta's call for due process, writes Winston Churchill, is the main foundation of English freedom. He continues, "The right of the executive government to imprison a man for reasons of state was denied, and that denial, made good in painful struggles, constitutes the charter of every self-respecting man at any time in any land." Is this not stirring? Churchill wrote that in his History of the English-Speaking Peoples, and every time I read those words, I am proud to be an English-speaking person. All of which to say, those penny-pinching barons at Runnymede, those knights and Coke and Parliament standing up to the crown, made it thinkable for Thomas Dudley, John Winthrop, and the other assistants in Massachusetts Bay Colony's court to build a fort and train militias and construct a beacon to guard against an invasion by their own king. And I'll stop reading here to say that, that never happened. The English Civil War was kind of heating up back in England, and Charles I would soon have his head chopped off by Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans who took over the government, and also the governor who was supposed to be dispatched to come take over in Massachusetts. The ship that was supposed to bring him to Massachusetts, it broke, and so he never made it, but that's just a nice little moment of what if. And a lot of the book is about what we as Americans inherited from the Puritans. But there are certain things that we inherited just simply from the English, and I like those passages to illustrate that very Anglo aspect of our backbone. So now I'll take questions if you have any.
This morning on KUOW, you were talking about how the Cherokees owned slaves, and I would
Yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah, let's start with that.
Go ahead.
And I would like to know any information that you have about that, and if any other tribes did that, and how that started happening, and how they treated the slaves.
The question is about the Cherokee owning slaves, if any other tribes own slaves. I don't know, maybe the Creek and the Chickasaw did, I'm not sure. What was it you wanted to know?
How was it that they started to do such a practice?
How did they start? The Cherokee really were, they were Southerners. They were Southerners. They were Southerners with plantations, and they thought erroneously that if they developed a written language. No other American Indian tribe has a written alphabet. They started printing a newspaper. They ratified a constitution. They had plantations with proper slaves, just like proper Southerners, and they thought that would that would keep them from removal and save their place in Georgia and the Carolinas and Tennessee, but that didn't help. And the slaves, and then the Cherokee brought their slaves with them on the Trail of Tears. So if you think being on the Trail of Tears is bad if you're an Indian, try being a slave. So, yeah. Thanks. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible story, but the one thing I guess I like about it, if you can say you like something about that, is I don't like the whole, there's a kind of racism against American Indians that, the noble savage thing that treats them as inherently good just because they were decimated. And I would like to point out that they are human beings and just as capable as evil as anyone else. So I find that story, while horrifying, it sort of humanizes them a little bit. That's me looking on the bright side. Go ahead.
Who do you feel is the most underappreciated character in American history, or in particular somebody who we should know about, but for reasons we don't happen to learn as much about them as we do other individuals?
Who do I think is the most unappreciated person in American history? Who was the person who invented caller ID? 'Cause I would like to know more about this person. This person has spared me from talking, and at times I was not really in the mood to talk. So there's that. I don't know. Do you have a nomination? No? Go ahead.
You say in your book that one of the reasons that brought you to do the Puritan book was after finding comfort in Winthrop's words.
After what?
After finding comfort in Winthrop's words after 9/11. I'm just wondering, what brought you to that to begin with? I mean, I have to say, I hadn't heard of him before.
I had this book of sermons. I'm sure you have it too. And the model of Christian charity was, one of my sermons in my anthology of sermons. It's really one of your better sermons. And I think I got that book because it had a Martin Luther King sermon I was looking for. So.
How do you balance your roles as a humorist, journalist, historian, when you're writing and producing content, whether for the radio or for a book? And do you ever find it difficult to make a choice between, maybe detailed historical accuracy versus a well-turned phrase or joke?
Well, I mean, I don't think about any of those questions. I think that would be a little maddening. I just think of myself as a writer, and wherever I am at every story just kind of demands, each story kind of calls out for how it should be told, So, I mean, sometimes, like on the radio, a lot of dilemmas are decided just because of time, or I don't know. I mean, it just kind of depends. I mean, usually even the jokes and stuff, I like to think sort of most of the time have a point, except when they don't. I mean, like there are these things I do, I call them shenanigans, and sometimes they're just like pure tangents that for me are just part of the joy of being a writer is, going off down a dead end for a second. But I don't really think about the balance or anything. Like, I mean, different topics, like with this book, different topics require a different sensibility. Like there's, the description of the Pequot, the massacre at Mystic Fort, in which 700 men, women, and children are burned alive. And that one is relatively not particularly chatty, but then other times when, like, Roger Williams hears his wife is sick, and as her get well note, he writes her a treatise on behavior that's full of examples of how the men of the Bible are constantly being dragged down by the women in their lives. Like, that brings out a little bit more of the lighthearted in me, So I don't want to choose. I mean, just some things require, a different kind of tone than others. And, I hope, like, being a halfway decent person really makes a lot of those choices more than any kind of, editing plan or something. But I don't really think like that. I mean, I just try and write. When I'm writing, I just want something to be clear and not generic. And sometimes, the least generic, most clear way to say something is with a joke or not, whatever. Just I just write how I think. I'm a whole person, sir. Yes.
I guess I was curious because when I was reading Assassination Vacation, I got a sort of negative vibe about John Brown. But I was wondering how you think that fits with what you were describing today about what you thought about
John Brown, the terrorist. You got a negative feeling about him?
But
I don't know where you didn't get that from me.
well,
He was an upstanding murderer, that guy.
well, I guess what I was getting is that this seems to be somebody.
He hacked up families, like with, I think, a machete. I mean, he had some very good ideals. Also, he was against slavery, but
Well, right, but this is. I mean, I guess what I'm suggesting is that this is a person who engaged in great personal risks to try, and I mean, it was kind of stupid, but I mean, he tried to free. I mean, he was trying to do something that he thought was right out of a religious conviction. Mm-hmm. But it seems like that's very similar to what John Winthrop, how you described the John Winthrop case going on here, and I guess I was wondering what the admiration for one, but not so much admiration for the other.
well, I do spend a lot of my book talking about Winthrop and his fellow magistrates doing things like punishing someone who speaks against the magistrates by banishing him and slicing off his ears. That thing about burning the Pequot alive. I mean, Winthrop is as complex a figure as John Brown. I guess probably Winthrop kind of farmed out the violence, whereas John Brown, did the hacking and shooting himself. But I mean, there are a lot of figures in history and current events who, have these ideals, and some of them are right, but, they back up their ideals with violence. And part of, I think, talking about that and writing about that is important. The first line in my book is, the only thing more dangerous than an idea is a belief. And I try, I have my beliefs, but I try to question them, and I try to, keep track of my own rigidity. And I feel like a lot of the, not just violence in the world, but a lot of the large-scale violence, a lot of the state-sponsored violence, a lot of the terrorism in the world, is that kind of violence is only perpetrated by people who, with beliefs. But large-scale violence, especially genocide, is usually only accomplished because of idealism. I kind of compare Puritan Massachusetts with the Soviet Union, because both of them start out with these ideals of community and solidarity and brotherhood, and those are really wonderful, really beautiful ideals, but the way they hold their communities together is by exiling, and sometimes, especially with the Soviets, killing the people who stick out, the people who make waves. So I think idealism is sometimes the most dangerous commodity in the world, and it gets people killed. And I don't know how else to say it.
With your appreciation for the English and the English language, and this sort of, sometimes people talk about the British get irony in a way that Americans just don't. And I wonder if you'd do us the favor of defining what that difference is that makes Americans so bad at understanding irony.
We're bad at irony?
I think so.
What makes us bad at irony?
Yeah.
I don't know. We're more open-hearted than the English. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's true. Is it? I guess maybe I just run in a kind of smart alecky crowd.
Well, maybe it has something to do with the belief that you were just talking about. The people who take their beliefs so seriously, they can't see the problems with it.
I don't know what to say about that. I remember when McSweeney started, and we would do have the journal and then put on our events, and then we got called ironic, and we always thought we were just joking around, it wasn't like we weren't snotty or anything. We were just kind of joking. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. Do you know?
No, I really don't.
I wish I did. Sorry. The thing I like about being a writer versus this kind of thing is the thing I actually love most about being a writer is having the time to think of what to say versus this. No, truly, I'm not kidding. You'll notice that I'm not the most clear thinker, but I'm aware of that as a writer and really try and hone it down. So I apologize that you are getting the live me.
I love it. I love it. Thank you.
But I appreciate being asked a question that I haven't been asked in the last 10 days, even though I didn't know the answer to it.
We usually think of the Puritans as being, puritanical. So I was wondering, in researching the book, if you came across anything about the kind of sexual attitudes and practices of the Puritans that connects with or disconnects with the attitudes of particularly the religious right today.
The sexual attitudes?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem like the religious right and some of their topmost representatives are all that sexually repressed, does it? Seems like they're always, their children are knocked up, or they're in an airport tapping on the next guy's stall, or
So a lot like the
the
original
thing
Puritans.
about the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay Colony is that they were against adultery, which, you know, most courteous people are.
And I remember,
But they're quite gung-ho for marital sex, and several women in Massachusetts, 17th century Massachusetts, sued for divorce successfully because their husbands were impotent, and marital sex was considered like part of marriage, and so therefore very important to them. And John Winthrop was quite a he and his wife had quite a lovely marriage, to the extent that he came over before her, and they had this standing date on Mondays and Fridays at 5 o'clock where they were to think of one another. But I mean, the thing that they reserve, I found in their writings, they reserve their ardor, their true ardor for God, and in a frequently fairly it's expressed in a fairly smutty way a lot of times. Like they will write things about Jesus that made me blush, you know. Like falling asleep in wanting to sleep beneath his skirts, that kind of thing. So, if you're looking for some excitement, you could do worse.
I remember having to read of Plymouth Plantation in college, and some pretty racy passages about turkeys and other farm animals that
Right.
got them pretty whacked out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I find them to be a fairly lively group in a lot of ways.
So sort of like today's.
What's that?
Sort of like today's.
Oh, as for today's evangelicals, I mean, actually, there's like this, the kind of in between, you know, today's evangelicals are more descended from what came after the Puritans and the Great Awakening and all that more kind of ecstatic, emotional form of Protestantism. Like, my people are Calvinists, they are intellectuals, they are theologians, they want their ministers to know Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, and to have read Aristotle, and they're incredibly academic people who are fearful and disdainful of the uneducated preachers, and I say, like, there's no speaking in tongues going on in Massachusetts Bay unless you count classical Greek. Like, it's a really, really intellectual culture, which is one of the things I love about them, is their passion for writing and thought and education and debate and knowledge, and they look up to the learned, and so do I.
I reread Assassination Vacation.
Good, you're all caught up.
Yep. Good election reading.
He reread, did you hear that?
So the book really instilled in me a love of noticing plaques and statues. And I just happened to be walking through our own volunteer park the other day, and there's a statue of William Seward,
Oh, really?
who, among other things...
Oh, I know who he is.
Right.
Yeah.
He was the governor of New York, and he purchased Alaska, which made me wonder if he was to blame for Sarah Palin.
Ah. Yeah, I believe he is. Though you shouldn't laugh. Isn't that totem pole in Pioneer Square? Isn't that totem? Maybe you finally sent it back, but that totem pole that was there for like 100 years or something. Like, some people from Seattle went up to Alaska, and the Alaskans were out fishing, and your people just like took their totem pole because they thought it was pretty, and then the Alaskans come back from fishing like, what the hell happened to our totem pole? Go on.
Well, I don't know. I guess I was kind of wondering how you started your love of noticing the plaques and statues that are a monument to our culture.
The first plaque I ever had a personal relationship with I think was when I was in college and I went to Europe, and I remember taking this. I had this guidebook to Dublin, and I remember that it was like a rock guidebook, so you could go like eat lunch at the place where Sinead O'Connor used to be a waitress, you know. And I remember going to this coffee shop where Bob Geldof of the Boomtown Rats wrote "Rat Trap," and there was a plaque, you know, and that isn't even their biggest hit. And I just remember thinking, like, that plaque just was the funniest thing I'd ever seen, you know, just like that, because it was someone of basically my own generation had already gotten a plaque, you know. So that one, I think after that, I just started noticing plaques as like these incredibly, a lot of times very eccentric little expressions of civic pride. And like when you're hip to the plaques and the statues, like your town kind of just fills up with stories, you know. Like in my neighborhood in New York, there's a statue of the Marquis de Lafayette, one of my favorite, you know, of the Revolutionary War generation. And every time I, you know, go to the grocery store, I like, you know, kind of wave hello to Lafayette, and I just like that he's there and thinking about him, because, you know, there's a lot of mundane stuff you have to do to like feed yourself, and that's just nice. In that same like park where he's at, there's a Lincoln, and there's Gandhi, and there's George Washington, and for some reason, and the Gandhi always has a garland of flowers around his neck, and a little flower in his hand, you know, that some Gandhi lover always, you know, makes sure he's good with the flowers. And I don't know, they're just little narrative sparks, I find. So I hope you enjoy more plaque and statue sighting.
Along those same lines, national park sites, specifically national historic sites, make an appearance a few times in your books. Mm-hmm. And so I was just would be interested in hearing your assessment of the national park system.
The National Park System. You know, the National Park System is the most popular, across-the-board popular federal program, and rightly so. You know, what the Park Service does with an incredible deficit of resources, which the current president, you know, one of his campaign promises was to reduce the Park Service maintenance budget, as you know. He has not gotten around to that. He's been very distracted. But I love national parks, especially because I'm from Montana and I'm not particularly outdoorsy. And I don't know if you know what it's like to be a not particularly outdoorsy person. Growing up in one of the most outdoorsy places in the world, where all the outdoorsy people are so competitive and so like macho even, and especially the women. And it's all about like, you know, like endurance and hardship and like climbing stuff and like really ugly equipment. And so I grew up in Montana kind of, you know, eschewing the outdoors, thinking like you had to be some kind of expert to, you know, enjoy the outdoors. And then as an adult, I feel so drawn to the national parks because they're so very welcoming. And that like the last time I was at Yellowstone, my sister and I were taking a walk around one of the lakes at Yellowstone, and there is this woman who passed by us, this woman and her husband, and she had a beehive, and she was wearing these like capri pants and high-heeled shoes. And like compared to her, I'm like Jim Bridger or something, you know? And I loved that this woman was enjoying one of the most beautiful lakes in the world in her stupid high heels, like walking on the little pathway there that she, you know, had driven to, and, you know, like, and it was just free and open and available to her and everyone. And I just can't, I mean, I try to go to at least one every summer, and I mean, there are national parks for a reason. Some of them are just some of the most, you know, spectacular, wonderful places. I think it was maybe 3 years ago we went to Mount Rainier, which was nice, which is way farther than it looks from Seattle. Last year I went to Volcanoes National Park, which was very fascinating. My heart belongs to Yellowstone, obviously, but I am just over the top gung-ho about national parks. Thank you for asking.
One of the things I really like about your work is the enthusiasm and humanism that you bring to history, and it sort of reminds me of also like Paul Collins' his work too also brings that kind of similar, just joy to writing. And I was wondering, who working today do you also enjoy and draw inspiration from, and all that kind of fun stuff?
As a writer?
Yeah.
What other writers? Let's see. I'm crazy about this English writer named Jeff Dyer. Have you read any of his books? Sometimes he wrote one about jazz, but he wrote this book I love that's called Out of Sheer Rage, and it's a book about trying to write a book about D.H. Lawrence. And so it's this book about frustration, basically, but it's also about D.H. Lawrence, even though it's about not being able to write about D.H. Lawrence. So, he clearly loves D.H. Lawrence and also hates D.H. Lawrence. And, I really like he's great nonfiction writer. I like Ian Fraser. Have you ever read that book of his, Great Plains? That's a book I love because it's all over the place. He's, driving around the Great Plains, and sometimes it's just about, some person he meets, and then the next chapter will be about his obsession with Crazy Horse. That's a very sprawling, wonderful, sometimes really funny book. I'm drawing a blank. I think in a few weeks, my friend John Hodgman will be here, and he is very passionate about, fake knowledge. So that is also fun, too. If I think of anything else, I'll let you know. Do you have any other recommendations?
I don't know. He's more of a television journalist, but he's also done a book or two. But Louis Theroux, who's also an Englishman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I like his work, and he's, I think he can have a similar thing about I guess sociology. I guess if you want to put a label on it, but. So, and then also, just in science fiction, like Spider Robinson, I think has a similar sort of humanistic approach. But
Spider Robinson.
Yeah.
I'll look into that.
So. Thank you. Thank you.
I remember your story from 8 years ago when you and a group of people who you had been commiserating with went to the inauguration of George Bush. And I wonder what has become of that group, and if you have any updates to give us on how you're doing in this election season.
The group kind of it was an email group that was kind of obsessed with the election, and that election kind of broke us. We still, write each other individually, but we're not a group anymore. So, I don't know what else to say. You know how, you grow up and grow apart. It's one of those kind of things. Your government gets itself into this, never-ending war, and, it's I can't imagine. Obviously the news is so crucial, and, we all, followed the news all day long now in a way, but it's not as fun to talk about. The thing that was so great about the 2000 election, that was so fun to be so nitpicky and poor over everything, was that because the country was in relatively great shape, all the ideas were incredibly kind of narrow and specific, and you could talk about, policy things. About the Park Service maintenance budget and how people are talking about that instead of, the big gaping hole that is our economy, or the big gaping hole that is our the big gaping hole we live in, is less fun to email 12 million times a day about, because, it's so crucial, everything. I don't know. Those were good times, though. Thank you.
I saw you on The Daily Show, and you mentioned listening to FDR and getting some solace from the words that he had back then, and I was just wondering, what was it about what he said that gave you solace?
The thing I liked about, she's referring to one day last week when after the economy, that whole thing. And I couldn't really face the newspaper again, and so I just started reading the fireside chats, because people keep referring to, like during the Depression, how President Roosevelt really bucked up the nation, and so I decided to get bucked up and started reading the fireside chats. And the thing I liked about them is how inclusive they are. He kind of talks about everything everyone can do. He talks about what he can do as president, what the rest of the government can do, what the bankers can do, and then what the people can do. And the other, he's continually advising people not to panic, and I guess our current president is doing that a little bit too, but for some reason it's just more reassuring from Roosevelt. But but the thing I love about, we all know that quote, there's nothing to fear but fear itself, but that's just a continual through line in all of them, is the destructive nature of fear. And he is constantly kind of like being aware of that and dissecting that and cautioning against that, and he just has this real anti-fear campaign, and it's just so refreshing, considering all the fear-mongering of the last few years, when it seems like the government exists solely to freak us out. And especially the executive branch seems happiest when we're at our most reactionary scared, to have, a true leader who is saying, that fear itself is destructive, and the thing, that we can guard against that, and we can do that together, and you can do your part, and I will do my part, and together we will get through this. And he's also, he just explains a lot of things, how banking works, or he's just very he's a really good teacher. He really kind of teaches through things as a way, partly of just doing his job, but also to put a stop to so much fear and panic. And it seems like that we have definitely lost that in our leadership. And it's not just him being it's not untruthful, and it's not him looking on the bright side. And a lot of times he says certain decisions are going to be harder on some groups than others, and he names those groups. But just the calming nature of it, and also even though he's very educational and explains things, he doesn't really talk down to people, and the way he includes the whole country in his in his endeavor, that he says, we need a new national will. And the way he says it makes you feel like you could be part of that and you could help. And it's very stirring. And I just haven't gotten that lately from my living leaders. So.
It being Columbus Day, I was wondering what you thought of Columbus Day and whether or not we're doing a good job with our historical holidays, and what your favorite one might be. And
Thanks. What if we're doing a good job with our historical holidays? I don't know. I feel like people could do more with the day Lincoln was shot. What do I think of Columbus Day? I don't know. It obviously is it's hard to think of that as a holiday, considering the big can of worms. I'm continually obsessed with European contact and the various, the progress of that. And, one of the things I write about in this book, though, is how destructive that initial contact was, even before settlement, because, there was this plague that kind of ravaged through the Americas that perhaps wiped out as much as 90% of the original inhabitants. And I even, go so far as amending my topic sentence that there's the only thing more dangerous than an idea is a belief, that maybe the only thing more dangerous is a germ. And Columbus ushers in the age of cooties, basically. And so it's hard. It's crushing. Like, imagine maybe 9 out of every 10 people you know are dead. Like, it's a horrifying, just the introduction of Europe's germs into these continents was incredibly devastating. But also the good things happened. I like thinking about that spark, those meetings, and so I don't know what to say about Columbus. Can of worms, right? But maybe if I were Italian, I would be a little more rah rah rah. But I'm not Italian. And as for historical holidays, I don't know. I guess you got your President's Days. Do you have any that you're kind of aching for? I live in New York, so it's pretty much, we're big into the Jewish holidays there. But I also haven't had a job since 1994. So all holidays are just kind of theoretical to me. So I'd probably have a different relationship with holidays than people with actual jobs, being self-employed. So I don't know. I do enjoy, what do I like? I like fireworks. I like turkey. And those, I feel like there are enough. In fact, as a person who doesn't have a job, the days when the civilians, as I call those of you who do have jobs, when you're not doing your job, because I'm usually doing my job on various holidays, it's always disruptive to me and my work because you're suddenly randomly gone because of the holidays, or you're suddenly randomly running your errands in my errand running time. So I should maybe I should make my boss, me, observe holidays, and then I would be better able to answer your question. Until that time, I remain holiday neutral. Anywho, I would like to thank you all for coming. What a nice show of support. It's so nice to be back here in the capital of Montana. I have a kind of lifelong partiality to this town and its people and music, and I'm so happy to see all of you here tonight in this beautiful building. So thanks for coming out.